May 6, 1944, Atlantic Ocean, 20 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. The sea was glass calm, the moon full, the stars cold and merciless. Beneath them, the USS Buckley. DE-51 cut a white V through the still water, her twin screws churning the dark Atlantic into silver foam. On her bridge stood Lieutenant Commander Brent Able, 34 years old, lean, sunburned, and running on black coffee and nerves. He had commanded Buckley barely a year, yet tonight he was about to fight the strangest battle in the history of modern naval warfare. At 0216 hours, the radio crackled. The nasal voice of a Grumman TBF Avenger pilot filled the bridge. Contact sighted, surface sub bearing 160 degrees 20 miles ahead, west of Cape Verde. She's on batteries, charging low speed. Abel's grey eyes narrowed. Plot it, he ordered. Sound general quarters. Klaxons wailed through the ship. Men tumbled from bunks, boots half laced, helmets pulled over bare heads. Buckley's decks hummed as the gun crews ran to their 3-inch mounts, 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons. The pilot's sighting could mean only one thing: a German Type 9, C/40 U-boat, and not just any boat. Intelligence had reported U-66, commanded by Korvettenkapitan Gerhard Seehausen, operating near these waters. U-66 was a killer, credited with 33 Allied ships sunk, over 200,000 tons lost to the deep. She had terrorized convoys from the Caribbean to Freetown. If that was the boat ahead, Buckley was about to meet one of the deadliest predators in the Atlantic. Flank speed, Able said. All ahead, 23.5 knots. The destroyer escort surged forward, bow cutting through the moonlit swells. At 0300 hours, the Avenger above continued shadowing, radioing small course corrections. U-66 was on the surface, diesel engines roaring, recharging batteries after 4 months at sea. Her crew was exhausted, her airfoul, her morale thin. They expected to meet a Milchku supply submarine, not an enemy. At 0308, 3 red flares arced into the sky, a recognition signal. The Germans believed Buckley was their rendezvous. Abel's lips twitched in disbelief. Hold fire, keep closing. 4,000 yards became 3,000, 2,000, 1,000. Then, as the Americans closed within musket distance, U-66's lookouts realized the silhouette slicing towards them wasn't German. Achtung! Zerstörer! Someone shouted. A flash burst from her bow tube. Torpedo in the water! Starboard bearing! Hard left rudder! Able roared. Buckley heeled, foam spilling over her rails. The torpedo hissed past, close enough for men on deck to hear its propellers whining. Seconds later, it detonated harmlessly in the ship's wake. Range 2,000 yards. Open fire. The first salvo from Buckley's forward 3-inch battery roared. The rounds streaked over the water and smashed into U-66's forward deck, blowing her 88mm gun into a fireball. Her bridge erupted in sparks. Now every gun aboard Buckley joined in. 3-inch, 40mm, 20mm, even small arms fire from the bridge wings. The night turned white with tracer fire. The destroyer escort's gunners poured over 100 rounds of high explosive shells and thousands of cannon rounds into the submarine's silhouette. U-66 replied desperately with machine gun bursts, but most went high, whistling through Buckley's rigging. At 0324, the U-boat fired another torpedo from her stern tubes. Fish off the stern, shouted the sonar operator. Able yanked the helm hard to starboard. The torpedo foamed across their bow, missing by seconds. The range closed to yards, mere yards. The two ships were racing side by side now, their guns so close the tracers seemed to cross mid-air. Abel's voice cut through the chaos. Keep hammering! U-66's conning tower was burning. Flames licked through the railing. German sailors, faces ghostly in the firelight, tried to man their deck guns, but were torn apart by 20mm bursts. 16 minutes of continuous gunfire left Buckley's decks littered with hot brass. The air reeks of cordite. Then the moment came when no more distance remained. "Range 20 yards," shouted the helmsman. Abel made a decision that hadn't been made in modern naval combat for a century. "Hard right rudder, ram her!" Buckley lurched. Her bow swung across U-66's course, metal shrieking as she climbed the submarine's forward deck. Sparks cascaded as steel met steel. For a frozen instant, the 1,400-ton escort literally rode atop the German U-boat. Engines reverse full. But before Buckley could disengage, shapes appeared in the firelight. German sailors climbing out of the burning conning tower, pistols and knives glinting in their hands. "They're boarding us," someone screamed. The order to repel boarders hadn't been shouted in the US Navy since the 19th century, but it echoed again that night. Men grabbed anything they could reach: Thompson submachine guns, M1 carbines, pistols, wrenches, shell casings. When those ran empty, they swung fists, boots, even coffee mugs ripped from the galley. A German petty officer leapt to the rail and was met by a sailor who cracked him across the jaw with a metal coffee cup. Another sailor hurled an empty shell casing like a club. The deck became a frenzy of brawling figures illuminated by burning tracer rounds. Below the bridge, a steward's mate named John Andrews found himself face to face with a German who had crawled through an open hatch, knife in hand. Andrews snatched the nearest object, a scalding coffee pot, and smashed it into the intruder's face. The man crumpled. For 2 furious minutes, modern naval warfare reverted to the age of cutlasses and fists. 36 Germans tried to swarm over Buckley's forecastle. Half were killed or wounded before they could retreat. Lieutenant Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer, led the boarding attempt, hoping to draw American fire while Seehausen tried to free the sub. But the Americans outnumbered them, outgunned them, and outfought them. Abel shouted from the bridge, "Engines reverse, break free!" Buckley backed off, scraping down the submarine's hull, leaving 5 stunned Germans on deck who were quickly captured. Then U-66, still under power, swung around like a wounded animal and rammed Buckley in return. Her bow struck the destroyer escort's starboard quarter, tearing open the engine room and shearing off one propeller shaft. "Damage control report," Abel barked. "Starboard shaft gone, flooding in the engine room. Contained for now." As the ships parted, an American seaman glanced down into the open conning tower below them, pulled the pin on a Mk2 hand grenade, and tossed it inside. A flash. A roar. Fire belched from the tower like a blowtorch. U-66 shuddered violently. Her engines screamed, her bow dipped. The submarine began to circle, out of control, fire still burning in her conning tower. Men were jumping overboard. "Cease fire," Abel ordered. "Let her go." At 03:41 hours, U-66 slid beneath the Atlantic for the last time. Flames hissed out as sea water swallowed her. Her captain, Korvettenkapitän Seehausen, stayed at his post. 24 of his men went down with him. The battle had lasted 16 minutes. Buckley was left smoking, half crippled, and taking on water. One propeller gone, hull torn, engine room flooded, 550 miles from the nearest port. Yet she floated. 36 Germans bobbed in the water, some wounded, some stunned. Abel looked down from the bridge. These were the same men who had boarded his ship minutes earlier. His voice was steady. "Lower the boats, we're picking them up." The crew obeyed without hesitation. Tradition demanded it. You saved those who fought you once the fight was over. One by one, the enemy sailors were hauled aboard. Some had burns, others bullet wounds. All were exhausted beyond words. Dawn rose over a sea littered with debris and oil. The Atlantic was still again, as if erasing the chaos of the night before. Buckley's crew gathered on deck, silent, staring at the spot where U-66 had gone down. The smell of smoke clung to their uniforms. Chief Engineer William Dixon approached the bridge. "Sir, flooding's contained, but we've lost the starboard shaft completely. Port engine's still running, but she won't take more than 12 knots. Abel nodded. "Then 12 knots it is. Plot a course for New York." The engineer hesitated. That's 2,000 miles on one screw. Better than none. The radio officer handed Abel a fresh message. Confirmation that USS Block Island and her escort group would rendezvous within hours. The carrier's aircraft had been the ones that spotted U-66 in the first place. They'd provide cover on the long, limping voyage home. Abel stepped to the bridge wing. The sea breeze was warm, thick with diesel and salt. Behind him, his men were tending to the wounded Germans, offering water, cigarettes, blankets. Some of the prisoners stared at the Americans in disbelief, as though unable to comprehend kindness so soon after bloodshed. A boatswain's mate whispered to another, "You ever think you'd fight Krauts with coffee mugs?" The other man laughed weakly. "Hell, I didn't think I'd live to drink from one again." By noon, Buckley was steaming eastward at 12 knots, her patched hull groaning, her deck streaked with soot. The Atlantic stretched endless and empty ahead. The battle was over. The journey home had only begun. At 2:16 on May 6, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Brent Auel stood on the bridge of USS Buckley as an Avenger pilot radioed urgent coordinates. German submarines surfaced 20 miles ahead, west of Cape Verde Islands. Abel was 34 years old, with 11 months commanding this destroyer escort, but Buckley had never faced a U-boat this close. The submarine ahead was U-66, the seventh most successful U-boat in the entire war. 33 Allied ships sunk, over 200,000 tons sent to the bottom. Abel ordered flank speed, 23.5 knots. Buckley cut through calm Atlantic waters under bright moonlight. Perfect conditions for a surface engagement. The Avenger stayed overhead, feeding course corrections every few minutes. U-66 was recharging batteries, waiting for a supply submarine. She'd been at sea since mid-January, nearly 4 months without resupply. Her crew was exhausted, low on fuel, desperate. At 0308, 3 red flares shot up from the submarine. Recognition signal. The Germans thought Buckley was their supply boat. Abel held fire, kept closing. 4,000 yards became 3,000, 2,000. The gamble worked until U-66's lookouts realized their mistake. A torpedo launched. Buckley turned hard left. The fish passed down the starboard side, missing by yards. At 0320, Abel opened fire. First salvo from the 3-inch guns hit U-66 forward of the conning tower. Direct hit. The submarine's deck gun was knocked out. All of Buckley's weapons engaged, 3 in, 40mm, 20mm. The U-boat returned fire with machine guns, but most rounds went high. Buckley's gunners hammered the conning tower, hit after hit. At 0324, U-66 fired another torpedo from her stern tubes. Abel saw it coming, turned hard right. The torpedo crossed ahead of Buckley's bow. Close. The range closed to 20 yards. Parallel course. Point-blank fire raked U-66 from stem to stern. The submarine's conning tower was on fire. Germans were visible through the flames trying to fight back, but Buckley's guns were overwhelming. 105 rounds of 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm, 418 rounds of 40mm, all in 16 minutes. What happens when a destroyer escort runs out of distance to shoot? Please hit the like button. It helps others discover these stories and subscribe. Back to Abil's decision at 0329. At 0329, Abel made a choice no destroyer escort commander had made in modern naval warfare. Hard right rudder ram the submarine. Buckley's bow rolled up onto U-66's forecastle and stayed there. The two vessels locked together, steel grinding against steel. Then Germans started climbing out of the conning tower. Some carried pistols, some had knives. They swarmed onto Buckley's forecastle. The Americans thought they were being boarded. What happened next hadn't occurred in the United States Navy for over a century. Hand-to-H hand combat on the deck of a warship. Buckley's crew grabbed whatever they could find. Thompson submachine guns, M1911 pistols, rifles. But when those ran empty, sailors fought with fists, with 3-inch shell casings, with coffee mugs from the galley. One German made it inside the ship, reached the wardrobe. A steward's mate beat him back with a coffee pot. The fight lasted 2 minutes. Germans fell, Americans fell. Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer, led the boarding party from behind the anchor windlass. He was trying to create a diversion, give his captain time to break free, but there were too many Americans, too much firepower. Herbig and his men shouted for surrender. Abel ordered engines reversed. Buckley backed away from U-66, leaving 5 armed Germans on deck. They were subdued immediately, but U-66 wasn't finished. The submarine came around under power, aimed directly at Buckley's starboard side. At 0335, she struck. The collision tore open Buckley's engine room, sheared off the starboard propeller shaft, twisted the stern. 16 minutes from first shot to sinking. Buckley's crew had just fought the only hand-to-hand battle on a US warship in World War II. 36 German survivors floated in the water, but Abel's ship was crippled, engine room flooded, one propeller gone, and they were 550 miles from the nearest port. The engine room was flooding. Water poured through the gaping hole U-66 had torn in Buckley's starboard side. Chief engineer reported the damage at 0345. Starboard shaft completely severed, flooding contained but spreading, port engine still functional. Abel had one propeller and 550 miles of Atlantic Ocean between his crippled ship and safety. But 36 Germans were in the water, some wounded, some in shock, all of them enemies 5 minutes ago. Abel ordered rescue operations. Buckley's crew pulled survivors aboard one by one, no hesitation. The same men who just fought hand to hand now hauled exhausted U-boat sailors from the Atlantic. Naval tradition. You save lives first, settle scores later. The rescued Germans were in bad shape. Many had burns from the fires inside U-66. Some had gunshot wounds from the close quarters fight. Others were simply broken. 4 months at sea, watching their submarine die beneath them, they were transferred to USS Block Island, the escort carrier whose aircraft had found U-66 in the first place. 24 German sailors went down with their boat, including Overlieutenant Zersgaard Jausen, U-66's commander. He stayed at his post until the end. U-66 had been a scourge of the Atlantic. Her record spoke for itself. 33 merchant ships sunk across 9 war patrols, over 200,000 gross registered tons, 8 American vessels among them. On January 16, 1942, she torpedoed the Canadian passenger liner Lady Hawkins. 246 people died. Civilians, Navy personnel, most never found. U-66 was one of 5 U-boats that launched Operation Drumbeat, the devastating attack on American coastal shipping in early 1942. Now she was gone, sunk by a destroyer escort that weighed 1,400 tons to U-66's 154. Sunk by a captain who'd been in command less than a year. Sunk in a fight that ended with coffee mugs and fists. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Germany's 7th most successful U-boat, defeated in the most primitive combat imaginable. But Buckley was barely floating. Abel assessed the damage as dawn broke on May 6th. Port engine operational, steering functional, hull integrity compromised but holding. The starboard propeller shaft wasn't just broken, it was gone, sheared clean off. Every rotation of the port engine put stress on a ship designed for balanced twin-screw propulsion. Maximum safe speed 12 knots, maybe 15 if they pushed it. New York was the closest major repair facility over 2,000 nautical miles northeast. Boston Navy Yard could handle the damage, but that meant crossing the North Atlantic on one engine with a hole in the hull. The alternative was limp into a forward base in the Azores, but they lacked the equipment for major repairs. Abel made the call, set course for New York, hoped the weather held, hoped no other were hunting these waters. Task Group 21.11 reformed around Buckley. USS Block Island provided air cover. 2 other destroyer escorts took screening positions. They were exposed out here. Every German submarine in the Atlantic had heard U-66's last transmissions. Some would be curious, some would be hunting. A crippled destroyer escort made an attractive target. The damage control teams worked through the morning, shoring up bulkheads, pumping water, welding temporary patches over the worst holes. The engine room crew monitored the port engine constantly. Any failure now meant dead in the water, helpless. The Atlantic in May 1944 was still a war zone. The Allies were winning, but Hubert still proud, still hunted, still killed. By noon, Buckley was making 13 knots. Steady course. The hull patches were holding. But every sailor aboard knew the truth. They were lucky. U-66 could have put a torpedo into Buckley instead of ramming, could have disabled both engines, could have left them sinking instead of just crippled. The hand-to-hand fight made headlines later, the ram made history books, but the real story was simpler. Buckley survived because Able had made the right decisions at the right moments, and because his crew had fought with everything they had, including the coffee mugs. Able stood on the bridge watching the horizon. They had 6 days of slow sailing ahead. 6 days vulnerable. 6 days hoping the Atlantic stayed calm and the U-boat stayed away. His ship had just won the most unusual naval engagement of the war. But winning didn't mean safe. Not yet. Not with 1,500 miles still to go. The first 24 hours were critical. Buckley maintained 13 knots on one engine, steering a careful course northeast. The welded patches on the hull held, but the engineering crew monitored every seam. One failure could flood compartments faster than pumps could handle. The Atlantic was calm. No swells over 6 feet. That was luck. A storm would have torn the temporary repairs apart. On May 7th, Block Island's air patrols reported no submarine contacts within 200 meters. That didn't mean safety. U-boat could stay submerged for extended periods, surface only at night. By May 8th, Buckley had covered 300 meters, still over 200 to go. The crew settled into a rhythm. Damage control teams ran constant checks. Lookouts scanned for periscopes. Gun crews stayed ready, but word was spreading. Radio intercepts confirmed it. German Naval Command knew U-66 was gone. They knew how she died. Rammed by a destroyer escort, hand-to-hand combat on deck. The story seemed impossible. U-boat didn't get boarded. They sank from death charges or torpedoes. They went down fighting at range, not in close quarters brawls. But Buckley's action report was detailed, specific, undeniable. The coffee mugs bothered the Germans most. Official reports mentioned them 3 times. Ammunition expended included several General Mess coffee cups. That line appeared in the US Fleet Anti-Submarine Bulletin in June 1944. American sailors had thrown their breakfast dishes at one of Germany's most successful submarine crews. And it had worked. Some wounds on the German survivors were confirmed caused by ceramic impacts, coffee mugs, in naval combat in 1944. The hand-to-hand fighting lasted approximately 2 minutes. According to Buckley's action report, but those 2 minutes rewrote assumptions about modern naval warfare. Small arms fire accounted for 300 rounds of .045 caliber from M1911 pistols, 60 rounds of .30 caliber from rifles, 30 rounds of double buckshot from shotguns. Thompson submachine guns added more. But the close quarters weapons, fists, shell casings, coffee equipment, those were what made the story unforgettable. One detail stood out in the survivor interrogations. Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer, had led the boarding attempt knowing it was hopeless. His goal was simple: create a distraction, give Jalson time to break the submarine free. Herbig and his men climbed onto Buckley's forecastle with pistols and knives. They faced rifle fire from the repair party, Thompson gunfire from the bridge wing, and when the Americans ran out of ammunition, they faced fists and improvised weapons. Herbig survived. He surrendered after realizing the diversion had failed. The German who reached Buckley's wardroom also survived. He had made it past the initial fighting on deck, found an open hatch, climbed down, thought he could sabotage something, Find the radio room? Maybe. Instead, he encountered a steward's maid in the galley. The American grabbed the nearest object, a coffee pot, and beat the German back toward the ladder. Other crew members arrived. The German surrendered. Later, interrogation revealed he'd been aboard U-66 for all 9 patrols, survived depth charge attacks, survived aircraft strafing, but he couldn't survive a Navy cook with a coffee pot. By May 10th, Buckley was halfway to New York, 600 miles covered, 600 more ahead. The port engine was showing strain, oil pressure fluctuating, temperature running higher than normal. Chief engineer recommended reducing speed to 11 knots. Able agreed. Better slow than dead in the water. They adjusted course slightly, aiming for calmer seas. The crew's morale was strange. They'd won an impossible fight, sunk a legendary U-boat, fought hand-to-hand and survived, but their ship was crippled. Every day at sea was a risk. Every hour the port engine ran was borrowed time. They celebrated quietly. No loud talk about the battle, just acknowledgement. They'd done something nobody else in the US Navy had done in over a century. Repelled boarders on a warship in the Atlantic with coffee mugs. On May 11th, a new concern emerged. The starboard side damage was worse than initially assessed. Saltwater corrosion was spreading faster than expected. The temporary welds were holding, but barely. Another storm would be catastrophic. Able checked weather reports constantly. High pressure system holding over the North Atlantic. Forecast stable for the next 72 hours. After that, nobody knew. And they still had 4 days of sailing ahead. 4 days hoping the weather held. 4 days hoping the engine didn't fail. 4 days wondering if another U-boat was tracking them right now. May 12th brought the first real test. Weather reports showed a low pressure system developing 400 meters northwest. Not a full storm, but enough to generate swells. 8 to 10 feet predicted. Buckley's damaged hull could handle 6, maybe 7. 10 feet would strain every weld. Able altered course slightly south, trying to skirt the worst of it. The swells arrived that afternoon. 8 feet rising. Buckley pitched and rolled. The temporary hull patches groaned with each wave. Down in the engine room, the port engine labored. Oil pressure dropped, temperature climbed. Chief engineer reduced power, speed dropped to 9 knots, then 8. The math was simple. At 8 knots, New York was 6 days away instead of 4. 6 more days exposed. 6 more days hoping nothing broke. By May 13, the swells peaked at 9 feet, close to the limit. Water seeped through 2 of the hole patches, not flooding, but steady leaks. Damage control teams worked in shifts, reinforcing, pumping, monitoring. Nobody slept much. The port engine temperature was climbing into the red zone. They needed to shut it down for maintenance. But stopping in the middle of the Atlantic meant drifting. Helpless. Able made another decision, reduce speed to 6 knots. Let the engine cool slightly while still maintaining steerage. It worked. Temperature dropped 5 degrees. Stayed there. But 6 knots meant 8 days to New York. 8 days of exposure. The mathematics of survival kept changing. Every hour brought new calculations, new risks, new decisions. Meanwhile, the story of U-66 was spreading beyond military channels. Navy public affairs officers saw the propaganda value immediately. American destroyer defeats legendary U-boat in hand-to-hand combat. Perfect morale boost. They wanted details, photographs, interviews. But Buckley was still at sea, still damaged, still vulnerable. The celebration would have to wait. The German survivors aboard Block Island were providing their version of events. Interrogation reports confirmed the basic facts. U-66 had indeed tried to board Buckley. Klaus Herbig had led approximately 12 men onto the American ship's forks. They'd encountered immediate resistance, small arms fire, hand-to-hand fighting. The coffee mugs were real. One German sailor had a facial injury consistent with ceramic impact. The medical officer's report was specific. Blunt force trauma, circular impact pattern approximately 3 inches in diameter, coffee mug size. What the Germans couldn't understand was why Buckley had rammed them. Standard destroyer escort tactics called for depth charges, hedgehog mortars, gunfire at range, not ramming. Ramming was obsolete, hadn't been used since the age of sail, but Able had closed to 20 yards, and the submarine was too close for most weapons. Ramming was the only option, so he'd taken it, and it had worked. By May 14th, Buckley had covered 900 meters from the engagement site, 300 meters to New York. The weather was improving. Swells down to 6 feet. Port engines stable at reduced power. The hull patches were holding. Barely, but holding. The crew allowed themselves cautious optimism. 3 more days, maybe 4. They could make it. Then the port engine oil pressure dropped again sharply. Chief engineer reported bearing damage, probably from the extended running at reduced power with asymmetric loading. The engine needed immediate shutdown for inspection, but they were still 280 miles from port. Too far to drift, too far to tow. Able ordered speed reduced to 4 knots. Absolute minimum to maintain steerage. The bearing held. Temperature climbed, but stabilized. 4 knots meant 6 more days. But 6 days limping was better than dead in the water. On May 15th, Block Island's air patrols detected a submarine contact 70 miles south of Buckley's position. Possibly U-boat, possibly hunting. The contact submerged before aircraft could attack. Direction uncertain. Could be heading toward a Buckley. Could be heading away. Nobody knew. And Buckley was making 4 knots. A surface U-boat could do 18. If it was hunting the destroyer escort, Buckley couldn't run, couldn't maneuver, could barely defend herself. Able ordered battle stations and waited again. The submarine contact stayed submerged for 6 hours. Block Island's Avengers maintained patrol patterns, dropping sonar buoys, listening, tracking. At 1,800 hours on May 15th, the contact surfaced 60 miles south, moving west, away from Buckley, not hunting, probably heading to patrol stations further out. The threat passed, but it reminded everyone how vulnerable they were. 4 knots, damaged hull, 1 engine barely functioning. Easy prey. May 16th brought better news. Weather forecasts showed clear conditions for the next 72 hours. Calm seas. The port engine bearing was degrading but holding. Chief engineer estimated they could maintain 4 knots for another 4 days, maybe 5 if they got lucky. New York was 220 miles northeast. 4 days at 4 knots was 384 miles. They had margin, not much, but some. Able received a message from Commandant, Commander Destroyer Force Atlantic. Buckley was front page news. The New York Times ran the story May 14th. Destroyer escort sinks U-boat in hand-to-hand fight. The Associated Press picked it up. Radio broadcasts mentioned it. The coffee mugs were the hook everyone used. American sailors defeat elite German submarine crew with breakfast dishes. It sounded like propaganda, but it was true. The Navy wanted Able and his crew ready for public appearances when they reached port. Speeches, interviews, photographs, war bond rallies.